In the early 90s, luxury sedans were in an all-out war. BMW, Lexus, and Cadillac each brought unique things to the table, but then came a surprise challenger that caught them all off guard. This sedan was big, it was boxy, and it didn't care about being flashy. That car was the Grand Marquis, and it was built for a very different kind of luxury. So, how did this sedan carve out a loyal following during one of the most competitive eras in automotive history? To really understand, we got to roll back to 1987. That's when Ford kicked off a 5-year mission called EN53. And let me tell you, that wasn't some half-baked project. Ford threw $1 billion at it. So, what were they thinking on? Well, these two cars you've probably ridden in, or at least seen hauling cops around town. The Mercury Grand Marquis and the Ford Crown Victoria. Now, you might be thinking, why those two? It's simple. These full-size cruisers hadn't seen a serious redesign since 1979. That's ancient in car years. Ford knew if they didn't modernize them soon, they'd be left in the dust by the competition. So EN53 wasn't just a facelift. It was Ford's way of saying, we're not letting these American land yachts die off without a fight. But here's the thing. When Ford set out to redesign these beasts, they had to walk a tightrope. Yeah, they needed to bring the cars into the modern age, but they couldn't just toss out the old school charm. That boxy, formal styling, that wasn't just any look. It was the look their loyal buyers loved. You mess with that too much, and you risk losing your core crowd. But then, Ford threw a curveball. Believe it or not, they were actually trying to hook younger buyers with this new Grand Marquis. This car that had been the go-to ride for retirees and highway patrol was now supposed to win over younger drivers. But why take the gamble? Well, because the Grand Marquis wasn't just another sedan. This was Ford's stealthy way of dipping into the near luxury market without having to build a whole new car from scratch. And if they could make this redesign work, they'd pull in more upscale buyers and do it on the cheap. So this wasn't just a new look. It was a make or break moment for Ford. But when Ford finally pulled the cover off the redesigned Grand Marquis in 92, boom, it was a hit. But why? Because Ford gave the people exactly what they wanted. A big, comfy V8 cruiser that didn't mess around. Let's start with what really mattered to buyers: ride comfort and space. This thing still sat on Ford's good old Panther platform, which was basically built like a tank. Long travel springs and soft shocks. It floated over the road like your favorite recliner on wheels. And not just soft, it was quiet too. At highway speeds, it hushed the outside world better than most so-called luxury cars. But here's where the car really pulled ahead of the pack: the inside. Just look at the cabin. It was huge. You were sitting in big, squishy seats that felt more like your living room couch than a car. Tons of headroom, legroom for days. And the trunk? A monster 21 cubic feet. You could toss in a week's worth of luggage and still have room for a couple of golf bags. Try doing that in a BMW. So yeah, the Grand Marquis didn't just meet expectations. It reminded people what real American comfort was all about. So we know the inside and outside got a refresh. But the real magic, that was under the hood. Ford went all in with a serious mechanical upgrade. The big headline? A brand new 4.6-liter V8. And this wasn't just any V8. This was the first overhead cam V8 ever dropped into an American brand car. This was a huge deal. They called it the modular V8, and it was light years ahead of the old school 5-liter pushrod engine it replaced. Lighter, smoother, and straight up more powerful. This engine proved that Ford wasn't just phoning it in. They were modernizing under the skin without messing with the classic formula. Big V8, rear-wheel drive, body on frame. It was old school bones with new school muscle. And to keep things smooth, power went through a 4-speed electronic automatic. This wasn't a burnout machine, and Ford didn't pretend it was. The Grand Marquis was made to float down the highway at 75, soak up bumps like butter, and do it all with that new V8 purring under the hood. And it wasn't just power and comfort. Ford actually got serious about safety, too. Every Grand Marquis came standard with a driver's airbag. Might not sound like much now, but back then, that was a big move. Airbags were just starting to become mandatory. and Ford was getting ahead of the curve. But here's the part that really stood out. Mercury threw in anti-lock brakes and low-speed traction control. Yeah, traction control in a full-size American sedan back in '92. That was rare. Most of the competition hadn't even caught up yet, while other brands were still figuring out how to keep their big sedans relevant. Ford was quietly slipping in high-end tech you'd usually expect from luxury imports. The Grand Marquis wasn't just a comfy V8 cruiser anymore. It was becoming one of the smarter buys on the road, too. So, how did it do once it hit the streets? Well, the 1992 Grand Marquis was a straight-up sales hit. Ford pumped out over 163,000 of them that year, double what they sold the year before. And the critics, well, they were on board too. Reviews at the time praised the Grand Marquis for being a killer value, loaded with standard features, built like a tank, and whisper quiet inside. And that cabin? Solid, durable, and just plain comfortable. It was the kind of car you could sink into and cruise for hours.
The new 1992 Mercury Grand Marquis, the grandest Grand Marquis ever, with more room, more power, and even more fuel efficiency than the Legend it replaces. A Grand Marquis that was among the industry's highest in owner loyalty.
Now, yeah, it wasn't perfect. The car was heavy, and the suspension setup was a bit old school. But here's the thing. Buyers liked that. It was part of the charm. So what's the legacy? Well, the Grand Marquis became a cult classic. Not because it was fast or fancy, but because it was bulletproof. Big, soft, simple, and easy to wrench on. For a lot of folks, it was the last true American land yacht, one that never pretended to be anything else. And that's something worth remembering.